how the presence of those leaves room for the individual to find a way to persist or to be tough, in your words. And there were two examples that stuck out that I'd like to kind of dig into a little bit. One being the Canadian coaches Dennison and Mills, the other being Steve Kerr, as he was coaching the Golden State Warriors. And all these coaches kind of experimented with that player-led coaching environment, giving the players some of the choice, back in practice in the training component, because they're the ones, on competition day, they are the ones making choices in the moment. So let's practice that and actually give them some autonomy there. I love that approach. It's something that we see mirrored a lot in higher ed right now with a student-centered approach and giving some of that autonomy back to students. What I'm kind of curious about from that perspective is where are the boundaries and what sorts of structure do you still need to put into? You don't want to just say, hey, go crazy. And, a lot of this might be age appropriate, and you're not going to give full autonomy of the school day to a 6-year-old versus someone in college. But, maybe can you talk about where that structure comes in a more autonomous role where it's a player led or a coach or a student led activity?
It really is about finding that, what I'd call that middle path. And a lot of that is dependent on who's sitting across from you, right? So my wife is a literacy specialist in elementary school. So she works with, those 6-year-olds essentially. And, I talk to her about this all the time. And where I, having often worked in the college setting, might give a longer leash and more decision-making, like she can't, as you said, just be like, hey, choose what you want to do, choose your own adventure, because it'll be chaos, right? But what she tries to do in those situations is give enough structure around it and then some choice in those moments. So for instance, in teaching, it's, they'll often have workshops where it's like, okay, we need to teach this skill, but then she'll give, even 6-year-olds, hey, you can demonstrate this skill in a number of ways. And here are 3 options, right? You can go write about it, or you can go record a video explaining how you would teach this to someone else, or, you can go whatever else it is, but you're giving a little bit of that constraint, or you're giving a lot of constraint, but enough autonomy where the student goes, oh, okay. I get to contribute to this. I get to say, I'm going to show my skill in writing a story about this, or telling a story, or whatever it is, with that structure. And I think that's really important. So the way I kind of look at it is, as a leader or coach or boss or whatever, how do I set the appropriate constraints that gives them focus and gives them that goal and teaches the lesson? And then within those constraints, how do I give them choices so that they feel like they are participating actively in this learning and development process? And, you do that and good things happen. And then, the example that you talked about in the book, which I think is great, is that Steve Kerr example, which is also, you got to know when to pull that autonomy card out. So, the long story short on the Steve Kerr is Steve Kerr, coach of Golden State, multiple champions. One time he saw in the middle of the regular season, he saw his athletes, his team was kind of getting a little complacent and not listening to him as much. So what does he do for one game? He says, you know what, guys, you're going to be the coaches. You call the plays. You're in charge in the huddles. I'm going to step back. Now, we didn't do that for the rest of the season or during the, the playoff run. He was very intentional on saying, you know what, I'm going to give this autonomy to show the players that I trust them, to give them a different perspective, to maybe kind of get them out of that kind of funk that they're in. And it works. So sometimes it's about being very, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, deliberate and intentional on where you give that freedom and structure so that you get the best out of those you're working with.
Not a coaching scenario here, but a parenting scenario. As a result of your book, that was one of the things I've kind of been experimenting with is where can I give? So I have a 6-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. And so where can I give my 6-year-old some additional autonomy when temper tantrums come up? That's, one of the things we're working on is behavior. And when he's losing it and going crazy, one of the things I've been experimenting with is asking or giving him the choice, do you want to reset or do you want me to help you reset? And giving him the space to kind of create that. And so I just wanted to say thank you for kind of introducing that idea. Hopefully, I mean, maybe I don't know if I'm sounding like a bad parent now. I hadn't figured that out already. But again, thank you. I think it's been a helpful tip that I've found successful with him. And again, gives him some of that choice in the matter instead of just a authoritarian beat him over the head with the rules of, hey, get in line. It's, how do you want to do this? Here's the goal. Like you said, identify the goal. The goal is calmer behavior and kind of figuring out the situation, rational emotional response rather than crazy 6-year-old, but allowing him to play a role in that as well. So thank you.
Well, speaking of that, in looking back and doing some of the research, I think that's a very interesting thought there, especially as it pertains to families. Did you see this type of approach in the past? Has this been done before? Like, because when I think of those that went through World War II, I don't imagine them being like, how do you feel today? And then we're, like almost allowing them to kind of work through some of that stuff. And maybe it's something more today, but I almost feel like some people overshoot it and give too much autonomy or too much freedom to youth who don't have those boundaries or don't have the foundation yet. So was this something common before that is coming back around as many things do? Or is this kind of a newer approach that we're realizing, wow, there's something to this?
Yeah, so the history on this is fascinating. And that, like everything in life, it ebbs and flows and comes and goes. So if you look at actually some of the research in parenting styles of, we'll call them indigenous tribes, right? Whether that's like Eskimo tribes in like Alaska and Canada, or tribes in Africa, or like indigenous in Mexico, is back in the like 1950s and 60s. There was a lot of brilliant parenting work where they just go, anthropologists would go observe these parents, and what they found is that these situations, or these indigenous tribes, often had kind of this golden middle ground of what we're talking about here, where it's like some constraints, but also a lot of freedom and autonomy in here. So it's something that is, the anthropologists often said, like, this is something that's been around for, probably, generations on generations on generations. And it works really well. And again, I don't remember all the research, but I remember in one of the studies on kids and parents in, I think it was northern Canada, again, kind of like Eskimos, etc., is they found that one of the central teaching components was what they called equanimity, which is essentially, how do you navigate these emotions and not like throw tantrums and kind of blow up, which is often what we see in our modern world. So to answer your question is, I think these ideas have been around for a long time, but in modern Western, civilizations, what happened is we often look towards like optimization and efficiency, which often, especially in that kind of World War II area, pushed us towards like, well, how do we get this done as efficiently as possible? Well, we become dictators. So we skewed too far in this one direction. And I think, to your point, because when we skew too far in one direction, what happens is you almost get the slingshot effect back. So some people are saying like, oh, never discipline, never, set high expectations. And you're saying, no, we went too far in the opposite direction when that happens, because then there are no constraints. And what we know is, based on the research, when there are no constraints, what that really means is it tells the kids there are no rules. There's no way to navigate this place. And it's like chaos, because